The afternoon train groaned to a stop in the dusty cattle town of Red Creek, Kansas, in the spring of 1887. Steam hissed into the warm air as passengers climbed down one by one, greeted by loved ones, employers, or curious townsfolk. Among them stood Clara Whitmore, clutching a worn leather suitcase with both hands. She paused on the platform and looked around. The journey from St. Louis had taken nearly a week, and every mile had carried her farther from the only home she had ever known. She had sold nearly everything she owned to afford the trip after receiving months of thoughtful letters from ranch owner Walter Harlan, a wealthy widower seeking a wife through a marriage agency. His letters had painted a picture of honesty and hope. He had written about endless skies, peaceful evenings on the prairie, and his desire to build a family with a woman who valued kindness above beauty. Clara had believed every word. She wasn't a woman who turned heads. At 24, she had soft brown hair usually tied into a simple braid, gentle gray eyes, and a modest face untouched by expensive powders or fashionable cosmetics. Her dresses were handmade, carefully patched where needed, and always neat. Her greatest gifts had never been her appearance but her patience, intelligence, and willingness to work hard. As she stepped off the train, she spotted a tall man wearing a fine black coat and polished boots. His expensive silver belt buckle gleamed in the sunlight. He tipped his hat politely before studying her face. "Miss Whitmore?" he asked. "Yes," Clara answered with a hopeful smile. "Mr. Harlan?" He nodded but did not return her smile. Instead, he slowly walked around her, looking her over as though he were inspecting a horse at auction. Clara felt her cheeks grow warm under his gaze. Finally, Walter folded his arms. "I suppose the agency sent the wrong woman." Clara blinked in confusion. "I beg your pardon. You don't look anything like I imagined." She reached nervously into her bag. "I brought the photograph I mailed you." He barely glanced at it. The photograph was small. "I never tried to hide who I was." Walter sighed with obvious disappointment. "I expected someone prettier." The word struck harder than a slap. Several people nearby stopped talking. Even the station porter lowered the crate he had been carrying. Clara forced herself to remain calm. "I am the same woman who wrote every one of those letters." "Perhaps," Walter replied, "but letters don't prepare a man for reality." Silence settled over the platform. Then he said the words Clara would never forget. "I'm sorry, Miss Whitmore. This arrangement won't work." Her fingers tightened around the handle of her suitcase. "You mean, you're sending me back?" "I'll pay for your ticket." The kindness she had imagined in his letters disappeared behind cold pride. To him, she was nothing more than a purchase that had failed to meet expectations. Clara swallowed the lump in her throat. "I left everything behind. I'm sure you'll manage." Without another word, Walter turned toward his carriage. The horses trotted away, leaving a cloud of dust that slowly settled around Clara's shoes. The station emptied until only a handful of people remained. Some pitied her. Others whispered. She kept her head high despite the sting in her eyes. Crying here would only make the humiliation worse. The elderly stationmaster approached gently. "Miss, are you all right?" She managed a small smile. "I will be." "You have family nearby?" She shook her head. "No, sir." "You've somewhere to stay tonight?" Again she shook her head. "I hadn't planned that far." The old man frowned but was called away as another train whistle echoed in the distance. Clara carried her suitcase to a wooden bench beside the station and sat quietly. She stared at the folded letters Walter had written over the past 6 months. Every promise now felt empty. Every hopeful sentence suddenly seemed like a cruel joke. Still, she couldn't bring herself to throw them away. Across the street, inside a small general store, cowboy Eli Carter loaded sacks of flour into the back of his wagon. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in faded work clothes, Eli noticed the young woman sitting alone. He had seen Walter leave without her. He had also heard enough of the conversation to understand exactly what had happened. Eli had spent years working on ranches owned by wealthy men. He had watched polished ladies arrive in elegant dresses, only to complain about dust, hard work, and country life before leaving. He had learned that appearances could fool a man far more easily than character. As he secured the last sack, he looked back toward the station. Clara remained on the bench, quietly wiping a tear before anyone else could notice. She wasn't begging for sympathy. She wasn't angry. She simply looked heartbroken. Eli removed his hat and scratched the back of his neck. His closest friend, Ben, noticed where he was looking. "You thinking about helping her?" Ben asked. Eli nodded slowly. "A woman doesn't travel halfway across the country to deserve that." Ben shrugged. "Not your problem." Eli watched Clara stand, lift her suitcase, and ask the ticket agent about the next train east. The answer clearly wasn't what she hoped. The next train wouldn't leave until tomorrow evening. She thanked the agent anyway. No complaints. No tears. Just quiet dignity. Something about that settled deep in Eli's heart. He climbed down from his wagon, dusted off his hands, and crossed the street with calm, determined steps. Clara looked up as his shadow reached the platform. Removing his hat respectfully, Eli offered a warm smile. "I couldn't help hearing what happened," he said gently. "And for what it's worth, I think that fool was looking for fancy." Clara lowered her eyes. "I suppose I wasn't." Eli's voice was steady and sincere as he met her gaze. "I've had fancy," he said. "What I've always wanted, is real." Those simple words, spoken without pity or judgment, marked the beginning of a story neither of them could have imagined when the train first rolled into Red Creek that afternoon. Clara Whitmore never imagined that a stranger's kindness would become the doorway to a completely different life. The morning after she was rejected at the train station, she woke up in a small room above the local boarding house, staring at the ceiling and wondering what her next step would be. The dreams she had carried from St. Louis had disappeared overnight. She had come west believing she would become a wife and build a home. Instead, she found herself alone in a town where everyone knew her story. People whispered when she walked down the street. "That's the woman Walter Harlan sent back. She must have done something wrong. Maybe she wasn't what he expected." The words hurt, but Clara refused to let them break her. She had survived difficult years before. After losing her parents, she had learned how to manage a household, grow vegetables, repair clothing, and stretch a few coins into enough food for a week. She knew her worth was not decided by one man's opinion. Still, she had no idea what future waited for her. That changed when Eli Carter returned to the boarding house that afternoon. He stood outside her door holding his hat in his hands, looking more nervous than the dangerous cowboy people often described him to be. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Clara offered a polite smile. "No, Mr. Carter. Is there something you need?" Eli hesitated before speaking. "I heard you're planning to take the train back east." "I am." "Do you have somewhere to go?" Clara looked away for a moment. "Not exactly." Eli nodded slowly. He wasn't a man who spoke many words. Life on the frontier had taught him that actions mattered more than promises. But he knew he couldn't walk away knowing she had nowhere to turn. "I have a ranch about 20 miles outside town," he said. "It's not fancy. It needs repairs. The roof leaks in 2 places, the fence is falling apart, and my cooking could scare a hungry wolf away." For the first time in days, Clara almost smiled. Eli continued. "But it's a place where you'll be respected." Clara studied him carefully. "Why are you helping me?" The question caught him off guard. Because the truth was, Eli didn't completely understand it himself. Maybe it was because he had seen too many people judge others by appearances. Maybe it was because he recognized loneliness when he saw it. Or maybe it was because Clara had shown more courage sitting alone on that station bench than many men he knew had shown in their entire lives. "I don't like seeing good people treated badly," he finally answered. Clara looked down. "Kindness is a rare thing. So is honesty," Eli replied. Over the next few days, Eli visited often. He never pressured her. He never acted like he was rescuing her. He simply offered friendship and a chance to start over. Eventually, he made an unusual proposal. "Marry me." Clara looked at him in surprise. "Mr. Carter. Before you answer, hear me out." He leaned against the wooden railing outside the boarding house. "I'm not offering you a mansion. I don't own fine clothes or a fancy carriage. My ranch is hard work, and life there isn't easy." "Then why ask?" Eli looked toward the distant hills. "Because I need someone I can trust. Someone who sees more than money and appearances." Clara was silent. She knew it was not the romantic dream she once imagined. There were no grand promises or elegant houses. But there was something Walter Harlan never gave her. Respect. After several days of thinking, Clara accepted. Their wedding was small. There were no expensive flowers, no wealthy guests, and no grand celebration. Just a few townspeople, a simple ceremony, and two people taking a chance on an uncertain future. When Clara arrived at Eli's ranch, she immediately understood his warning. The house was modest. The paint was faded. The porch creaked beneath her feet. Inside, there were empty shelves, old furniture, and a kitchen that looked like it had been forgotten for years. But Clara didn't see failure. She saw possibility. "This place has good bones," she said. Eli looked confused. "Most people would call it falling apart." Clara smiled. "Most people only see what something is. I like seeing what it could become." Those words stayed with him. Over the following weeks, Clara worked beside Eli. She planted a garden, organized the house, repaired curtains, and turned the cold, empty rooms into a home. The ranch hands who worked for Eli were surprised. They had expected a delicate woman who would complain about the hard life. Instead, they found someone who woke before sunrise, cooked meals for everyone, and listened to their troubles. Even the roughest cowboys respected her. But not everyone was convinced. Eli's older brother, Thomas, visited the ranch and watched Clara carefully. "She won't last," he told Eli. Eli frowned. "What makes you think that?" Thomas looked at the freshly repaired porch and the cleaned-up house. "Because women like her usually want more than this." Eli glanced toward Clara, who was laughing with one of the ranch hand's children. "No," he said quietly. "I think she wanted more than what people offered her." Thomas shook his head. "You're already defending her." Eli said nothing. But deep down, he knew something had changed. For the first time in years, his ranch didn't feel empty. It felt alive. And the woman everyone called Too Plain was slowly becoming the one person who made Eli Carter's world feel complete. As the months passed, the people of Red Creek began to see something they never expected. The woman who had arrived with a single suitcase and a broken heart was becoming the strongest person on Eli Carter's ranch. At first, many believed Clara Whitmore would leave. They thought the quiet life of a ranch would be too difficult for someone who had grown up in the city. They expected her to miss fine dresses, comfortable rooms, and the easier life she might have had if Walter Harlan had accepted her. But Clara surprised everyone. She never complained. Every morning before the sun rose above the Kansas plains, she was already awake. She prepared breakfast, checked the garden, helped repair fences, and learned everything she could about ranch life. Eli often found her standing beside the cattle pens, asking questions. "Why do you move the herd this way?" she asked one morning. Eli smiled. "Because cattle follow the path with the least resistance." Clara nodded thoughtfully. "People are the same." Eli laughed. You compare people to cattle often. Only when they behave similarly, she replied with a small smile. Those moments became precious to him. Eli had spent years surrounded by men who valued strength and toughness above everything else. Clara showed him that wisdom could be just as powerful. But not everyone appreciated her. Some women in town still whispered whenever Clara entered the general store. She was rejected once. Poor thing probably feels lucky just to have Eli. Clara heard the comments, but she never responded with anger. She knew people who judged others by appearances were often blind to what truly mattered. Then came the summer drought. For weeks, the Kansas sky remained empty. The fields turned dry, the grass weakened, and ranchers across the region worried about losing everything. Eli's cattle began struggling. The water supply was shrinking, and the price of feed continued to rise. One evening, Eli sat silently at the kitchen table, studying his account book. Clara noticed the worry in his eyes. "You're thinking about selling part of the herd." Eli looked surprised. "How did you know?" "Because you've been staring at those numbers for an hour." He sighed. "I may not have a choice." Clara sat across from him. "What if there is another option?" Eli raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." She explained that during her childhood, her father had faced similar problems on their small farm. Instead of using all their resources at once, they divided their land carefully, protected their strongest crops, and stored supplies for difficult seasons. Eli listened closely. "That works for a small farm," he said. "But this is a ranch." "The size changes," Clara replied, "but the principles don't." The next morning, Eli followed her suggestions. They changed the grazing patterns, protected weaker areas of land, and created a better system for saving water. At first, some ranchers laughed. "A woman is telling cowboys how to run cattle." But Eli trusted Clara. And slowly, the results appeared. While neighboring ranches continued losing animals, Eli's herd remained healthy. People began asking questions. How did Carter's ranch survive? What changed? The answer surprised them. Clara. The same woman they had called plain. The same woman Walter Harlan had rejected. The same woman they assumed had nothing special to offer. Now, she was the reason one of the hardest seasons in years had not destroyed Eli's dreams. Even Eli's brother Thomas began seeing her differently. One evening, he watched Clara repair a broken fence post while speaking kindly to a young ranch worker who had made a mistake. "You know," Thomas admitted, "I was wrong about her." Eli looked over. "That's rare for you to say." Thomas smiled slightly. "She's stronger than most people I know." Eli nodded. "Yes, she is." But while Clara was building a new reputation in Red Creek, someone else was watching from a distance. Walter Harlan. The wealthy rancher who had rejected her months earlier had heard the rumors. He heard that Eli Carter's struggling ranch was now thriving. He heard that the rejected bride he considered ordinary had become admired by everyone around her. At first, Walter refused to believe it. Then he visited the valley and saw it with his own eyes. He saw Clara walking through the fields, laughing with workers, checking supplies, and standing beside Eli as an equal partner. She looked happier than she had ever looked in his presence. For the first time, Walter wondered if the mistake had never been Clara. Maybe the mistake had been his own blindness. He had searched for a woman who looked impressive beside him. But Eli had found a woman who made his entire world better. And now Walter wanted back what he had thrown away. But Clara was no longer the woman sitting alone at the train station. She had found her confidence. She had found her home. And she had found someone who valued her for exactly who she was. By the time autumn arrived in Red Creek, Clara Whitmore was no longer known as the woman who had been sent away. The whispers that once followed her through town had changed. People no longer spoke about her with pity. They spoke about her with admiration. She had become the heart of Eli Carter's ranch. The farmhouse that once looked forgotten now felt warm and welcoming. The garden beside the house produced enough vegetables to share with neighbors. The ranch hands who once lived like lonely workers now gathered around Clara's dinner table like family. And through it all, Eli watched the woman he had married out of respect slowly become the woman he loved. But Eli was not the only one watching. 20 miles away, Walter Harlan sat inside his large office, staring out at his expensive ranch. He had everything most men dreamed of. Hundreds of acres of land, fine horses, a beautiful home, and enough money to buy whatever he wanted. Yet something bothered him. He kept hearing Clara's name. The same woman he had rejected. The same woman he had called too plain. Everywhere he went, people talked about her kindness, her intelligence, and the way she had helped Eli's ranch survive the drought. At first, Walter tried to convince himself that it didn't matter. She was never the woman I wanted, he told himself. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. The problem was that Clara had become valuable after he had already decided she wasn't worth his attention. One afternoon, Walter rode toward Eli's ranch. When he arrived, he saw something that surprised him. There was no sadness. No regret. No sign of a woman who had settled for less. Instead, he saw Clara standing beside Eli, laughing as they repaired a wagon wheel together. She looked peaceful. Happy. Walter felt something uncomfortable in his chest. Regret. Clara noticed him first. Mr. Harlan. Eli looked up immediately. His expression hardened. What are you doing here? Walter removed his hat. I came to speak with Clara. Eli stepped forward. Whatever you have to say can be said in front of me. Clara placed a hand gently on Eli's arm. It's all right. She looked at Walter. What do you want? For the first time, Walter seemed unsure of himself. I owe you an apology. Clara said nothing. Walter continued. I was wrong about you. The word surprised everyone. Months earlier, Walter would never have admitted such a thing. I judged you by what I saw instead of who you were, he said. I was foolish. Clara looked at him calmly. Yes, you were. Walter lowered his eyes. I want to make things right. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet box. Eli's jaw tightened. Walter opened it, revealing an expensive necklace. Come back with me, Clara. The silence that followed felt heavy. I can give you everything you deserve, Walter said. A beautiful home. Servants. Fine clothing. A life without struggle. Clara looked at the necklace, then at Walter. Once, those things might have impressed her. Once, she might have believed luxury meant happiness. But that woman no longer existed. Everything I deserve? She asked quietly. Walter nodded. Yes. Clara looked around the ranch. She saw the home she had built. The people who cared for her. The man who had offered her respect when she had nothing. I already have what I deserve. Walter looked confused. You would choose this? Clara smiled slightly. I choose a place where I am valued. Those words hit harder than she intended. Walter looked toward Eli. I suppose you think you've won. Eli shook his head. This was never a competition. That answer surprised Walter. Eli continued. She isn't something to win. Clara looked at him, and her heart softened. Because that was the difference between the two men. Walter wanted a beautiful wife to complete his image. Eli wanted a partner to share his life. Later that evening, after Walter left, Eli sat quietly on the porch. Clara joined him. You seemed worried, she said. Eli looked at the sunset. I thought maybe you'd want that life. What life? The easy one. Clara smiled. Eli, do you really think happiness comes from expensive things? He looked at her. I don't know. She sat beside him. When I arrived here, I had almost nothing. But you gave me something money could never buy. What was that? Respect. Eli looked away, trying to hide the emotion in his eyes. I'm not the kind of man who can give you fancy things. Clara smiled. Good. He looked surprised. Good. I was never looking for fancy. The words stayed between them. That night, Eli finally understood something. Clara had not stayed because she had nowhere else to go. She had stayed because she had found somewhere she belonged. But the past had opened old wounds, and Walter Harlan was not finished. His pride had been hurt. His mistake had been exposed. And now he was determined to prove that he could still take back what he had once rejected. But he had forgotten one important thing. Clara Whitmore was no longer the lonely woman waiting on a train platform. She was a woman who knew her worth. The morning after Walter Harlan left Eli Carter's ranch, the entire town of Red Creek was buzzing with rumors. Some people believed Clara had made a mistake. You mean she turned down Walter Harlan? One shopkeeper asked. That man has more money than anyone in the county, another replied. Others understood exactly why she had refused. Money isn't everything, the old stationmaster said. Some people spend their whole lives learning that lesson. Clara heard the whispers, but they no longer affected her the way they once had. Months earlier, those same voices had made her feel small. They had reminded her of the day Walter looked at her and decided she wasn't enough. But now, standing in the kitchen of the home she had built with Eli, Clara felt something she had never felt before. Peace. She was not the woman who arrived in Red Creek hoping someone would choose her. She had chosen herself. That afternoon, Eli found her repairing a curtain near the window. You really meant what you told Walter? Clara looked up. About what? That you already had what you deserved. She smiled. I did. Eli leaned against the doorway. I still don't understand why. Clara put down her sewing. Because you gave me a chance when I had nothing to offer you. Eli shook his head. You offered more than you knew. Clara looked at him. What did I offer? He walked closer. A reason to come home. The simple honesty in his voice touched her heart. For years, Eli had been a man who lived alone. He had a ranch, horses, and land, but none of it felt complete. He had convinced himself that loneliness was the price of independence. Then Clara arrived. She didn't just clean his house or help his ranch. She changed the way he saw life. But Eli still carried one fear. The fear that someday Clara would realize she deserved more. You know, he said quietly, when I first saw you at the station, I thought you were the bravest person I'd ever met. Clara laughed softly. I was terrified. Maybe. But you didn't let anyone see it. She looked down. I didn't want anyone to think Walter had broken me. Eli's expression softened. Did he? Clara thought about the question. No. She looked around the room. Because someone else reminded me who I was. Eli knew she meant him. But he also knew something important. He had not saved Clara. She had saved herself. The following Sunday, the town gathered outside the church for a community meeting. Walter Harlan had returned, hoping to convince people that Clara had been foolish to refuse his offer. He stood before the crowd wearing his finest suit. Everyone makes mistakes, Walter announced. I admit I judged Clara too quickly. But surely we can all agree that a woman deserves comfort and security. Many people looked toward Clara. She stepped forward calmly. I agree. Walter smiled, believing he had won. Until she continued. A woman deserves security. But security is not only money. The crowd became silent. It is waking up beside someone who respects you. It is having your voice heard. It is knowing you are loved for who you are, not for how you look or what you can provide. Walter lowered his eyes. Clara continued. When I arrived here, I was told I wasn't beautiful enough. I wasn't elegant enough. I wasn't what someone wanted. She paused. But I learned something important. She looked toward Eli. The right person will never ask you to become someone else to be worthy of love. The words moved through the crowd. Even those who had once judged her looked ashamed. After the meeting, Walter approached Clara one last time. I truly did not understand what I had until I lost it. Clara nodded. I believe you. His eyes showed surprise. You do? Yes. But regret doesn't change the past. Walter accepted the answer. For the first time, he understood that apologies could heal wounds, but they could not always rebuild what was destroyed. As he rode away from Red Creek, Clara watched him disappear into the distance. Then she turned back toward Eli. You never asked me why I stayed. Eli smiled. I thought maybe I already knew. Oh. Because this place became home. Clara smiled. You're right. That evening, Eli and Clara sat together on the porch watching the sun disappear behind the Kansas hills. The ranch was quiet. The air was peaceful. And for the first time in a long while, Eli allowed himself to say the words he had been holding back. I love you, Clara. She looked at him. I love you too, Eli. Their marriage had started as a chance taken by two strangers. But somewhere along the way, it became something far greater. It became a love built not on appearances, wealth, or expectations. It became a love built on seeing someone's true heart. And that was worth more than anything money could buy. Years passed quietly on the Carter Ranch, and the story of Clara Whitmore became one that people across the Kansas plains never forgot. The woman who had arrived in Red Creek carrying a small suitcase and a wounded heart had become one of the most respected women in the territory. But Clara never forgot where her story began. She remembered the cold afternoon at the train station when she stood alone, believing that one man's rejection had defined her future. She remembered the embarrassment, the whispers, and the painful feeling of not being wanted. And she remembered the moment a stranger walked across the street and saw something in her that she could not yet see in herself. Eli Carter had not seen a plain woman. He had seen courage. He had seen kindness. He had seen someone who deserved to be valued. Over the years, the Carter Ranch grew into one of the most successful ranches in the region. But what made it special was not the size of the land or the number of cattle they owned. It was the people who gathered there. Travelers passing through Red Creek always knew they could find a warm meal at the Carter home. Ranch workers knew they would be treated with respect. Families struggling through hard times knew Clara and Eli would help however they could. Their home became a place where people felt they belonged. One evening, a young woman named Sarah arrived at the ranch looking frightened and exhausted. Like Clara years earlier, she had traveled west hoping for a new beginning, only to find herself abandoned by the people who promised her a future. Clara recognized that sadness immediately. She invited the young woman inside. You can stay here until you figure out your next step, Clara said. Sarah looked surprised. Why would you help someone you barely know? Clara smiled gently. Because once, someone did the same for me. Eli watched from the doorway, his heart full. He had always admired Clara's strength, but moments like this reminded him why he had fallen in love with her. She had turned her own pain into kindness. She had taken the hurt others caused her and used it to make the world better. Years later, people still talked about Walter Harlan and the mistake he made. Some said he had lost the most valuable thing he ever had. Others said his greatest mistake was believing beauty could be measured by appearance. Walter eventually left Red Creek and moved away. He became successful in business, but those who knew him said he was never quite the same. Losing Clara taught him a lesson that wealth never could. A person's worth could not be measured by clothing, status, or a first impression. Meanwhile, Eli and Clara grew older together, watching their family grow and their ranch become a legacy. One evening, many years after that first meeting, Clara and Eli sat together on the porch overlooking the fields. The sunset painted the sky with shades of gold and orange. Eli held Clara's hand. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Walter had accepted you that day?" Clara thought for a moment. "I used to. And now?" She smiled. "Now I think he did me a favor." Eli laughed softly. "A favor?" "Yes. If he had chosen me, I might have lived a life where I was only valued for how I looked beside him." She looked toward the ranch. "But because he rejected me, I found a place where I was loved for who I truly was." Eli squeezed her hand. "I still remember what I told you that day." Clara smiled. "You do?" He looked at her with the same warmth he had shown years before. "I've had fancy. I wanted real." Clara rested her head against his shoulder. "And did you find it?" Eli looked across the land they had built together. At the home filled with memories. At the life they created. At the woman beside him who had changed everything. "More than I ever dreamed." The story of Clara Whitmore became a reminder throughout the frontier that first impressions could be wrong, and appearances could deceive. The world had called her plain because it only looked at the surface. But Eli Carter had looked deeper. He saw a woman with a beautiful heart, endless courage, and a love powerful enough to transform two lives. Because in the end, the finest things in life were never the things that glittered. They were the things that stayed. A loyal hand. A faithful heart. A place where you belonged. And a love that whispered the truth. You were never too plain. You were simply waiting for someone who could truly see you.